This show is brought to you by Buzzsprout.com, the best and excitingly prettiest way to start a podcast. Chapter 22. Meanwhiles in time. 1. And that, Eva Darling, is an example, nay, an exemplum of the correct and proper utilization of the solid silver self-cleaning sorcery separator.
You're completely mad.
It has been said several times, but more importantly, I believe it was a rather innovative mixture and application of meaningful, not to mention fashionable artistry in time, and equally space-saving ritual magic, with a smattering of allowance for literal motion capture and finally a spicy hint of karma. A good all-rounder, in my opinion. The guy was a prick.
Like a pinprick?
I'm sure the size was ultimately comparable.
Another future reference, I assume?
It's a reflex at this point. Apologies.
You're telling me you were able to disguise your identity to the point where you managed to ink your target's skin with a permanent pause seal, which you activated while he was attempting to escape through a portal that grew unstable and closed when he was halfway through, thus depriving him of his right arm and leg.
And other parts, unfortunately. He was in a peculiar position at the time.
And, if I'm not mistaken, due to the dismemberment occurring post-activation, the target had no idea what had happened to him until the slow wake of the amber in the labyrinths beneath the fields that they say comes to all who are in prison there, like somehow glimpsing the movement of a long-extinct creature, frozen thousands of years ago, but conscious, waiting for a melting point that may never come, a waking nightmare that may never end.
With only one final thought on his mind as he resides and slowly but ultimately readily perceives the passage of time. Where are my legs?
Legs? I thought he only lost the one in the portal mishap.
I may have hacked the other one off a little bit.
Hacked it off just a little bit, or?
It may put you off your tea.
The tea's lovely. If I'm honest, I'm more interested in how the sorcery separation comes into it, and the whole solid silver self-cleaning aspect.
Well, as you know from your classes, it's solid silver because it's always a good precaution to add silver lining to your pore seals, or any seal, really.
And the ink I used, I see, and the sorcery separation?
Well, I separated a sorcerer from his ability to live on his own terms. Where I come from, that's the highest dishonor that can be bestowed upon a man as guilty as he.
And the self-cleaning aspect?
A rather inevitable, somewhat self-evident, and ultimately predictable, complete and utter eradication of guilt for even wishing that upon one of my own kind, let alone enacting, executing, and rather enjoying the process.
And what could this target, this fellow timescar, have possibly done to deserve such an accursed fate, my dear?
He killed my mother. What's that look for?
Sorry, I'm sorry, I just didn't expect that, is all.
Well, you mentioned that you wanted to learn more about what happened to her. It's difficult for me to recount in full, in one sitting, certain intricacies of certain events, the true horror of it all. So I thought I'd lay it out in little peppered stories of ultimate triumph and revenge over the pointless and sadistic murder of the beautiful monster who bore me.
You must miss her.
Very much. Completely. It being baked into my family's nature to inspire fear through brightening smiles and whispers based on nothing other than intrinsic, not to mention rhythmically verbose, certainty. I suppose that you could say that I was a rather eerie child to hang out with. I could match energy frequencies and empathize. giving the illusion, I suppose, of security in friendship. You can be a very attentive friend when you can read everyone's minds, know what everyone wants, what they don't want. That passive ability, however, only becomes an active one if you work at it, which I did. It's not easy to train yourself out of a natural ability to block out the voices that usually make up the internal harmonic resonances of any time scar's consciousness. That noise that we can still hear in the silence. For some people, it is just silence. Maybe a high-pitched ringing sound or the sound of a beating heart. For people like me, it's everyone else.
And how do you cope with that?
It's not about coping with it, it's about learning to literally turn it down, block it out, and only re-raise the volume when invited or consented.
But how?
Oh, there are many rituals to self-impose mental barriers, my dear. That's all rather boring. The point I'm trying to make is that it's for your benefit, as well as for mine, in more ways than you might think.
Suppressing a natural ability doesn't sound like much of a benefit.
Oh, it is, my dear. According to the laws of my people, my specific clan, if you like, if you're an Aquitanian-born time scar, as time scars crisscross some other races that have their own laws I won't elaborate on just now, if you wish to leave Aquitania, that is to say, exist outside of one of the cosmic clock's oldest focal points, you must abide by what is known as the law of privacy and surprise.
And that law dictates?
Think of at least certain time scars such as myself as fortune tellers, but instead of vague premonitions of death, injury, or genuine good fortune, though that last one is fast becoming rarer, rather every word or thought spoken, every action to be taken, not taken, or desired to be taken and not taken. Reading a timeline like a psychic would read a palm. The timeline, though, that runs through the mind and through the heart. And those things are what people like me are born to read. But alas, outside of places like Aquitania, and indeed many places on Aquitania itself, privacy and liberty are often at stake in countless and varying ways, all across space and time. It's what I like to call my people's version of the non-interference policy, or rather, the less interference policy. As with informed consent, we are permitted to read the timelines of individuals we come into contact with. It's why I can't read your mind right now, unless you invite me in.
But there must be an exception.
What do you mean?
Surely you can just turn up the dark pale noise and decipher the specific pieces if you needed to, or wanted to. How would they know?
What did you just say?
What? Isn't that a loophole?
No, what you just said there about... dark pale noise.
What's the matter, love? Drink your tea.
Eva.
Sit.
I have a feeling I've missed something here.
No, you're being rather thorough, I must say.
Question. A person wants to get in touch with someone they know very well for tea and biscuits. What do?
I'd imagine they'd get in touch in whatever appropriate manner and suggest tea and biscuits.
Yes, and remind me, dear, because I seem to have rather quite conveniently forgotten who suggested this particular round of tea and biscuits.
I believe it was me.
Exactly, and remind me, dear, because this tea seems to be having a rather enlightening placebo effect on my current relative perception. Love a good cup of tea. Which one of us is unfortunately, and very sadly, dead, and therefore cannot be here? I can't even be here.
This is... sip. I'll tell you what this is not.
Will you?
One of those times when you're in complete control. In fact, you're sick, my dear. Very, very sick, and trust me, it's not looking good. So, listen, and sip.
Get out.
Mentor, I've missed you.
Get out, Eva.
Darling,
I said, get out. Then wake up, Redgrin. Who are you?
do you hear me?
I said, wake up. Two. Oh, my head. That was some slap. Where am I? What happened to my tea? And how did I get... Hello? Hello? Anybody in here? Gray? Jamie? Grandmama? House? No? Okay then. Sure is dark and cold and eerily still in here. Sometimes and somewhat comforting by my standards, however, no less perplexing. Some kind of chamber. A rather damp chamber, going by the smell. The odd taste of moisture in the surrounding air. Grayson? Bastards. Oh, Lord, I'm still not awake, am I? I read timelines. I know when it's happening to me. So, why don't we get more acquainted? I know you're out there. You think I'm scared? I'm not. I'm mad. And using Eva, that's a low blow. And striking a low blow to someone like me to get information is a bad idea. But then, anyone who knew me well enough to exploit a connection like her would therefore know that it is an effective, yet stupid idea by default. Once I see through it, which I just have, you won't be getting another word out of me. Not unless you show me your real face. You overplayed your hand with the disembodied voices and the dark room. Was this place all you could cobble together on such short notice? Still nothing? Okay. I'm not going anywhere. The future's here. I've surpassed my line. The redemption that came made me run out of time. Can our epitaphs exemplify us for revival. If that's true, then why don't we break the cycle? Isn't that how it goes? Oh, bloody hell. You. Me. Doctor, Lance with glee, smile to see and murder me. Drink my sins, my gins, the battle that which wins, the heat, the rust, the beating that we must compel to sell ourselves. No, not sick, not well, just cold. 'Cause hell. So, you found a way inside my head, have you? Congratulations. Welcome to my happy places. It's just darkness. I prefer the term crepuscular, and crepuscular it shall remain. Where's Grayson, Bellamy? What have you done with him? I think you should be more concerned about your own condition. It's not looking good. I think you'll find that despite the shade, I'm looking rather fabulous. Maybe inside your own drug-addled brain. You should see out there. You look like a mutilated cake. When was the last time you had a mutilated cake, Doc? Aren't you stuck with those rotational nutrition packs? Or some such? You must be starving. Not to mention shitting yourself. How long have you been visiting Silencia, as you call it? Oh, right to it, huh? How about ever since your boss forced me to speed up my recruitment process? I ended up overstepping on both sides. I have fallen out of favor, I suppose you could say. We have that in common. And so, we can help each other. You want me to keep you safe from him because we wrecked your invasive little science project. No. Without my help, you won't be in any fit state to protect anyone from anything. I take in a lot of strays, I grant you, some good, some bad, a large amount of both rather than merely either or, but I would much sooner die than harbor anyone who serves him. And what about little Grayson? Who would he be left with? The witch is indisposed, from what I hear. Your detective friend is nowhere to be found. And would you really trust your grandmother to guide him? I would trust Grayson to guide himself. Would you? When there's so much work still to do. So much at stake. Do you really think he can handle it? You'd be surprised what he can handle. You know, my superior doesn't yet know you're here. Any of you. I've seen to that. Because you're scared he'll tear out your ass? He might be angry, at first, until I hand you over to him. Imagine, just imagine, what Galen could do to time if I gave him you. No. If it's my only option, I'll take it. I'll give you to him good and weak, nice and malleable. If I manage to find my way in here, then you can sure it won't be long before he has the means to do the same, especially if I've provided him with a head start. Bellamy, you can't. Or, per my previous offer, you promise me and some of my men protection. Maybe store a few research projects for me, as there are some interesting recent discoveries I'd very much like to safely archive. And in advance, of course, I shall provide you with an antidote for your blood poisoning, returning enough of your strength, at least for you to secure your part of the bargain. The treatment is simple enough, and given further research, we may be able to bring you back over the line, so to speak. If you're lying to me, then I'm dead, thanks to you. And if I am lying, it still won't be long before your heart and blood turn to amber. Amber? That's what you're pumping into the spire. Tree resin? Something like that. What are you building, Bellamy?
Do we have a deal or not? I would say what's the phrase you always use? On the clock.
If you want refuge in my house, you'll need to fuse my signature. Otherwise, she won't let you in. I usually mark my guests upon their second or third stay, them having proven trustworthy, of course. That procedure is simple enough. But if what you say about my blood and general physical condition is to be believed, I doubt you'll be able to extract a pure enough sample by force, which you've probably tried already. That begs the question, why not just cure me first and take the sample post-treatment? But in the end, you'd increase the risk of me overpowering you, cut your bargaining chips by half. And if that did happen, you'd have even more explaining to do. Though by keeping me weak and bargaining for my consent, by dangling a cure and a latter permanent solution that eliminates the need for the karma bypass in the first place, the cherry atop the mutilated cake, as you so fervently described, you can strengthen your foundations and evade your soon-to-be rather pissed superior far more effectively. Am I wrong? In that case, you're going to have to walk with me a while. We need a clean signature, or at least an image of one that you can scan with your... I'm assuming you've managed to hack into my neural implants? That's why we're having this dreary conversation as opposed to me dreaming about the dearly departed? Well, you wouldn't wake up. And even if you did, you'd be busy coughing up many things. We had to freeze you to stop the infection from spreading. Cryogenics. No wonder it's so bloody cold in here. Well then, since my body's frozen, you must have my brain hooked up separately. I sincerely hope still inside its skull.
Yes, your brain is still inside your skull.
Good boy. In that case, we're free to travel. I hope your connections are nice and secure, Doc.
They are.
Are you linked to my inner auditory nerve?
Naturally.
Then, as long as all the chronon cycles remain near synchronous, my narration should make sense.
Your narration?
Very few people ever get to see what you're about to see, or experience what you're about to hear me describe. So do your best not to interrupt. 3. The Lotus and the Raven. Mercer. October 31st, 1888. It was a clear night at first. Nothing but the sound of nocturnal creatures, the crackling of a recently made campfire and a nearby river running smoothly, soothing the ears of the lupine shapeshifter, Arthur Hennessey, as he watched and waited. The shapeshifter mused upon the pockmarked face he wore. Putting a hand to his chin, he ran callous fingers through straggly facial hair, and then gently over his upper lip, then to his partially misshapen nose, then finally to the 3-tined gash in his cheek. A scar he did not wear for show. In fact, he couldn't hide it no matter what face he chose to wear. It was better to settle on a form as opposed to switching continuously, much healthier for the physiology to settle on certain regularities. And given his latest undercover profession, for which he had to present a rather intimidating demeanor to most who crossed his path, the 3-tined scar came in rather useful. Arthur himself had concocted many stories surrounding the how and why of his face, often relaying them to various bounty targets or those he had to impress on the side of intimidation, seeing what worked, getting creative, letting the rumors spread, and over time, allowing his reputation to speak for itself. I believe he got that tip from a friend of his. Arthur Hennessey always found who he was looking for, and always brought them back, alive if he could, dead if he had to, or in some cases, wanted to. His loving wife knew of his underhanded bloodlust, knew of his need to take a special kind of vengeance on particular kinds of cruelty and injustice, knew of his temper, which, thankfully, he had always been able to direct outwards. Most of the time, Arthur groaned, his fists clenching. This was how the thought process usually went, an introspective hand on the face, followed by musings concerning his undercover reputation, one he could feel he was becoming all too used to cultivating. And he didn't seem to mind that fact, or what it might mean if he chose to continue this life. Then the near all-encompassing anger of this life being forced upon him, upon both of them. And sometimes, when that life was threatened, even in small ways, like a bump in a routine, Arthur was liable to become irate and possibly dangerous. However, his reputation seemed to be doing enough talking to deter people who could truly make his life more difficult. And his day job was mostly spent making the lives of lawmen less difficult, which tended to take some of the pressure off. That and Mercer was a place that seemed to invite residents or passers-by to seemingly turn and stick to a life of crime. Why, just 2 hours earlier, when he had attempted to get his hands on a printed copy of a bounty target poster, a bounty popular enough that other hunters had seemingly grabbed up all the others, and had no luck. After a considerable amount of searching, Arthur began to ask around, engaging the townsfolk in conversation and ascertaining from an elixir salesman who had a room at one of the local hotels that he himself had spied a slightly damaged poster of the infamous Michael Callahan in the alleyway on his way out the side entrance. Arthur thanked the man, purchasing an elixir he never intended to use for the man's trouble, and found his way to the hotel. A particularly rude and unpleasant-looking man stood against the wall in the alleyway, smoking, an undertone of aggression in his seemingly relaxed stance. Behind and against the weight of the man's left shoulder, Arthur could see the crumpled poster. Lighting a cigarette of his own, the bounty hunter, in his kindest voice, said,
"Hey, friend, you mind if I grab that poster behind you at your back? If it's not too much of an imposition."
It took less than a minute of uneasy conversation for the man to accuse Arthur of infringing upon his liberties, and even less time for the man to suddenly begin either treating the poster like it was his personal property, or treating Michael Callahan as sudden long-lost family. This culminated in a very quick and rather shocking physical confrontation that nobody seemed to witness, and began with Heavyset Man drawing his gun on Arthur in a fit of accosted rage. Less than a minute later, satisfied that the asshole was still breathing, Arthur scanned the poster as he retrieved it, already planning his route as he exited the alley. He was about to call on his horse when a familiar voice called to him from not too far ahead. "Arthur! My friend!" Arthur smiled slightly without looking up from the poster. It was Colt, a man who Arthur had come to know well over the time he'd spent in Mercer. They often found themselves swapping war stories, Arthur of course taking liberties, omitting and occasionally embellishing where necessary, but the conversations never lost their underlying meaning and significance. Colt's wife had died of a terminal illness while he was away fighting. Colt came back to find her dead, and that destroyed him, sent him into a spiral that lost him his home, his father Henry's land, one of his eyes and 4 of his fingers. Now he wandered the streets of Mercer, begging and drinking his way through the rest of his days, living off whatever scraps people were kind enough to leave for him. Arthur would sometimes go hunting on his behalf, tried to make sure he had a proper meal whenever he could. He'd buy Colt the occasional drink, too, and they'd usually end up reminiscing further. Colt was one of the few people who knew the real reasoning for Arthur's dishonorable discharge from the Lupine Crown back on Aquitania, though he did not know, of course, what the LC was or where indeed it was based. But he did know why Arthur couldn't go back there, why he had become a pariah to his people, and why he and his wife had been forced to go on the run. How and why Arthur really got the 3-tined scar. Arthur recalled he'd just made something up in the alleyway minutes earlier before punching out the lights of someone who wouldn't remember anyway, and Arthur found that an aggressive or sinful act often gave way to a nice, positive interaction with Colt. And so folding the poster and putting it in his rather worn but sturdy satchel, Arthur offered to buy Colt something to drink. "We can get some food, too, if you want it." Colt beamed, his near-toothless grin wide. He spent about an hour with Colt, checking his more permanent injuries while Colt wolfed down his oatmeal. As always, Colt kept talking as Arthur performed his friendly examination, remarking on the tragedy of having the strength to accept and learn to live with life-altering injury, but simultaneously letting the unkind words, the inconsideration and general apathetic nature of people be the thing that makes you wish you were dead. "It's always the people, Arthur. It's always them. They make or break all of us."
"We're people, just like they are,"
Arthur said, applying a bandage from his satchel.
"Exactly right. And I believe that that is precisely why kind words do not and should not cost anything at all. Most in this town have shown me evidence to the contrary.
They said their goodbyes as the sun started to set. Arthur headed out of town, making camp a few miles away, not far from the Lotus riverbank. He stood out of sight of the near-distant road leading out to Ravenacre Farm for a long time, captivated by the reflecting moon, before something else caught his eye. Moving silently out of the firelight, Arthur crouched by an overhanging rock face, focusing on the riverbank. Against the darkness, the off-world soldier turned earthbound bounty hunter was near invisible, clad in his dark disguise, his human form. Despite his need for food, despite his desire for focus, despite being sure he'd just seen and could definitely smell dinner, in this case a rabbit, Arthur couldn't help but glance at the stars, immediately captivated by a comet as it cut across the sky. What are the chances? He said to himself, half smiling. The phenomena passed, and a feeling of melancholy began to overtake his satisfaction, becoming a homesickness that seemed to result in an ultimate loss of appetite. Arthur stopped looking at the stars, and instead turned his attention back to the campfire, also beginning his subconscious search for a match. Finding one and striking it, he watched the embers ride the soft breeze from the end of his cigarette to his leather waistcoat, snuffing out on buttons of brass. He wore it always, mostly over any kind of undershirt he could find. It hosted many gashes from past misdeeds and altercations, as did his steel toe-capped boots, in need of a good polishing, and his heavy-duty leather chaps that themselves came up to the mid-points of his considerably large thighs, the chaps he had made himself out of bullhide, and the wide-brimmed Nevada-style hat from muskrat and rabbit skin, decorated ceremoniously with various teeth taken from the first earthbound wolf he had been forced to kill years earlier. That was a night he wouldn't be soon to forget. Arthur stood, looking out once again over the Lotus River, watching the moon reflect off the rippling gateway, the beauty putting him in mind of his wife, the bravest, strongest, and most courageous being Arthur Hennessey had ever known. Arthur took a deep breath and stretched, considering, once more sweeping the bank with his vision. He may have lost his appetite, but he was certain that Colt would appreciate what Arthur was sure was a black-tailed jackrabbit lurking in the near-distant blades of grass. He could catch that and return to Colt the following morning, along with, he hoped, a heavily restrained Michael Callahan. One more for the gallows, though it was important that Arthur rested a little before that confrontation. He quietly retrieved his bow and arrow from his trusted steed, listening peripherally for any movement in the nearby blades. They shivered. He moved silently down towards the bank, keeping low and listening, the sounds of the night keeping him on his toes and yet putting him at ease in equal measure. He felt momentary remorse, as he usually did for his prey as it moved into his view, oblivious of this shadow-clad predator waiting to pounce. Arthur lined up his shot, hearing almost nothing except the tightening of his bow's sinew. He held his breath, and as usual, time seemed to slow. Half a second later, just as Arthur released the arrow, a gunshot rang out. Distant, but loud enough to drown out the jackrabbit's final yelp. There was a telltale follow-up of startled birds evacuating their nests and perches, then a loud scream of echoing anguish and pain. But not pain of the physical. Pain of loss. Arthur spun around, instinctively, drawing another arrow and raising his bow in a defensive stance, despite the position and distance of the shot. His horse, Kaze, seemed visibly more alert, but nonetheless unshaken. Arthur noticed her ear twitch in response to the quickening wind. He glanced up briefly to find the stars disappeared, overcast with sudden clouds, thunder rumbling in the near distance. Arthur sighed. "Okay, looks like riding out, girl," he said, slinging the bow over his left shoulder, retrieving his latest kill and mounting up. He replaced his bow with his repeater and prepared his pistols, sending Kaze into a slow, southward trot. He could tell the scream was a woman's scream. He could tell how far away she was, no more than half a mile east of his position, Ravenacre Farm. Arthur cursed, now recalling that as the same place where Michael Callahan had last been seen. The property itself had recently been listed and bought up for redevelopment, but as far as he knew, nobody had yet begun any work or moved in. though his information may be outdated, or rather that of the elixir man. Another shot rang out. The screams continued. Arthur and Kaze increased their speed as the approaching storm continued to brew in earnest. Ravenacre Farm was a very small plot of land a few miles outside of Mercer. The farmhouse itself was built into one of the several surrounding shallow hills. Around the farmhouse was a rather depressing assortment of rusted farming equipment, disused livestock pens, old dusted sacks of rotten grain, burnt-out chicken coops, and various pails, some overturned, some not, most with wildlife either living in them or growing out of them. It was a neglected place. The only current signs of life seemed to be that of a recently lit fire not far from the singular entrance to the house. That, and the voices, of which there only seemed to be two. Mere irritation versus pure resignation. Cold-blooded murder against hot-blooded mourning.
Easy now.
Okay, my girl, Arthur muttered as Kaze slowed. He dismounted and crouched low. The screams had developed into sobs. Arthur could almost feel the sting of her bloodshot eyes in his own. Whoever that woman was, she had just lost something precious. Very precious indeed. Though what, he couldn't yet tell. Arthur left Kaze, standing by a nearby, tightly wound copse of trees, a relatively safe distance away. There being only one entrance to the farmhouse and seemingly only front-facing windows was a slight problem. There was no telling whether the woman was being held at gunpoint, and if she was, Arthur's sudden entrance might set him off. Arthur decided to approach the house from the western side, then scale the shallow hill so he was right on top of the house. From there, he focused on the muffled noises below, listening carefully to the words, blocking out the surrounding noise of the now pouring rain and crackling skyline.
We can work this out, sweet thing. You know Callahan's your man. All it'll take is a little getting used to. That's all.
Please, I'll do anything you ask. Just, please, put the gun away.
I can do that, as long as you promise to keep down that racket.
All right. And could you please take him outside? Please. My eyes keep catching his face. I can't take it.
No problem, sweet thing. Beth, right? You just wait right there. Michael Callahan, Arthur thought to himself. Fancy meeting you here. Would have thought you would have moved on by now. It was a simple matter of waiting for the door to open, then a further pause punctuated by grunts of exertion as the Right Honourable Mr. Callahan dragged the body out of the entranceway. The man peppered in vague, underhanded threats while he was sure the woman was in earshot, and began doing what it turns out a surprising amount of people did when struggling to move or reposition a corpse. He began muttering to the corpse, to the dead man, that Arthur assumed was some familial or romantic relation to the woman. The dismissive way he was handling the dead man, most of whom's head was missing, was not helping Arthur's mood. Before long, Callahan turned his back, and Arthur saw his chance. He rose up from a crouch, towering over this murdering bastard from the height of the shallow hill, poised, as with the rabbit, to pounce, but this time for real, with his body. Arthur moved to jump. However, just before he pushed off, the woman came charging out of the entrance, knocking Callahan clear off his feet. The man rolled in the mud as the woman slipped in it, quickly recovering and breaking into a sprint. Callahan scrambled to his feet, his face caked in mud. He was grunting in frustration and wiping his eyes with his sleeve, going for his gun with his other hand. Before Callahan could move another muscle, Arthur came down upon him, not before letting loose a deep, lupine roar. One that escaped his human mouth and seemed to find its way right into Michael's soul, for his scream rivaled that of Beth's, if that was in fact her name. The man's terror, however, didn't stop his muscle memory from kicking in, and the two men began to tussle in the mud. The rain was really beating down now, and partially blinding Callahan and causing him to fight more desperately. He got a lucky strike in with his left boot. The blow sent Arthur rolling, also now partially blinded by the mud and rain. Nonetheless, he scrabbled forward again and got hold of one of Callahan's arms. Pulling on it, he drew the man towards him and threw out a fist, feeling a connection but not seeing it, only hearing a short cry of pain and a following gunshot. After that, there seemed to be a moment of respite, of calm, as if the whole world had stopped to look.
Arthur utilized this pause to wipe his eyes, and when he did, he wished he hadn't. What he saw was an outstretched, mud-caked arm. Callahan's arm. The arm was shaking slightly, and he could hear whimpering. Dazed, Arthur followed the gun's trajectory, his face crumpling when he saw Beth sprawled on her back in amongst the mud, gasping for breath. The stray bullet had hit her in the stomach, and in the near-distant firelight, Arthur could see a large pool of blood forming on her blouse.
Oh, God,
Callahan managed, before Arthur rose to his feet and struck the back of the man's head with the heel of his boot, knocking him out cold. Arthur threw the gun angrily through the nearest front-facing window of the hilled house. The glass smashed, and there was a terrible thud as it hit the wooden floor. Arthur ran over and knelt beside Beth. He lifted her gently.
Can you hear me, madam? Arthur asked. It's gonna be okay. We're gonna get some help. I promise. Just hold on. What's your name?
The woman tried to speak. Her words were coming out in pained, gurgled rasps.
Beatrice.
Well, ain't that a pretty name? It's good to meet you. I know. It's okay. You were right to try to run. I should have made my move sooner. I'm sorry. There was nothing he could do for her. Nothing that wouldn't cause dire consequences if he chose to try. But did he have the right to decide which consequences were dire or not dire enough? Which people were important or not important enough? Most of his ability to choose anything for himself or those he cared about or chose to protect was taken away from him years ago. He was told never to invoke selfishly or for a possibly preconsidered benefit, and only if there was no other way. There wasn't even a guarantee his plea would be heeded. And if it was, when would be anybody's guess. The when, in fact, didn't matter. It never mattered in these cases. So really, this was just a marking procedure, above all else. Yes, this line of reasoning was enough for him. He felt a soggy hand on his face, the latest fingers on his oldest scars. The woman had seconds left.
Hold on tight, madam,
Arthur said, gripping her free right hand with his free left and retrieving the talisman from around his neck. Beatrice was still barely breathing when Arthur laid her back down on the ground. He held the trinket by the chain, swinging it over her like a pendulum. All at once, the trinket began to glow, the heat seeming to almost vanish the chill of the storm. Arthur lifted the woman's blouse halfway up, exposing the seeping gunshot wound.
This is gonna hurt. I'm sorry.
Arthur lowered the trinket, the heat coming into contact and searing the skin, sealing the wound and replacing the would-be scar with the mark of the talisman. There was no cry of pain from Beatrice, because she had died 2 seconds earlier, and Arthur was almost glad she had passed before experiencing the pain. It would mean her final thoughts may not have been that of suffering, meaning that she may have died believing she was going to a better place. On the other hand, Arthur partially hoped she woke up in a worse place, because if Arthur's pleas were in fact answered, she might be pulled out of wherever she ends up and back into this miserable existence. If that was the case, maybe this world would end up seeing less cruel by comparison. First, Arthur tied Callahan up and left him inside the house, coming to the conclusion that Callahan dying of hypothermia would actually be far worse than useless. The man was still out cold. Arthur then began the process of burying Beatrice along with the man of unclear relation, and so as to have some company not including that of a murderer and the dead, Arthur whistled on Kaze once the rain had eased a little, and she had ambled up to the scene, looking slightly perplexed at what was now meeting her eyes. Arthur couldn't blame her. As she drew closer, Arthur glimpsed the dead rabbit hanging off of her saddle. Normally an image such as that wouldn't bother him, but now he was seemingly unable to hold back tears. Perhaps it was just the wind. From behind him he heard a sound he couldn't identify, and he turned. Then once again chalking it up to the weather, he returned to his work. The burial took less time thanks to the rain, though it hadn't much let up by the time he was done. The strange silver or steel-plated lining of having immediate access to farming tools was the only thing that stopped him from breaking out in a rage. Most of that, it turned out, was reserved for Mr. Callahan. The threats previous to the start of the journey felt rather therapeutic,
as did the beatings that preceded them. However, the journey itself carried some unexpected issues. Arthur couldn't be sure, and had no way of knowing, whether that natural phenomena that just occurred, the meteor shower that struck the outskirts of Mercer that very night on October 31st, 1888, was merely a bizarre coincidence, or a possible direct result of the call he had placed, the selfless bargain he had, in the moment, chosen to make. What Arthur Hennessey did know, however, was that he'd be making far less from Michael Callahan's bounty than he had initially intended, thanks to a small, sharp accident that had occurred as Kaze attempted and barely succeeded to evade the various peppered meteorites, one of which had been powerful enough to cause real damage. The irony of Arthur, Kaze, and Callahan being the only ones unlucky enough to be within striking range was not lost on him either. The closest call had caused Kaze to veer off track and trip over a jutting tree root. This sent Arthur flying and Kaze rolling, both of them, by and large, unharmed. Unfortunately, however, it also took off the right and Honourable Mr. Callahan's head in the process. Upon later examination, Arthur had managed to determine that Callahan's fatal injury was not caused by the fall, but in fact the very strike of the tiny, deadly meteorite itself. It had taken his head clean off. Now the severed head looked like a smashed pumpkin, and the body a severed middle finger from the deities, as if they were smiling down upon him with their fingers raised and jeering, "Happy Halloween, Acolyte." 4. So, do you have what you need? I think I do. It'll take me a while to compile this data, and I need to make sure that Grayson does not come to further harm without it looking suspicious. Fine. Now fuck off. I'm exhausted. I'll be back soon, assuming I succeed in keeping the clandestine alterations to my operation internal.
First to the finish, then?
Well, it's not like you're going anywhere. But I'll begin the procedure soon. I promise.
Looking forward to it, Doc. Looking forward to it.
Now, where was I?
I believe we were sharing a pot of tea. If you're a podcast clown like I am, you must have dreamed about starting your own. Let me tell you, my dreadful darlings, it's never easy, but it's one of the best decisions I ever made. It was either that or waste away in my own subjective ascendance. Of course, it can be more than just a little overwhelming to know how to get started. Buzzsprout can help you launch your podcast professionally and in style, linking you with all of the major podcasting platforms such as Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, and much, much more. Join us up in the buzzing, sprouting podcast cloud to breathe in the renowned analytical sound of the accurate analysis and promotion tools provided. Follow the link in the show notes below to start your journey and receive a $20 Amazon gift card. We're waiting for you. Buzzsprout, the best and excitingly prettiest way to start a podcast.